Hello, everybody. My name is Sister Eleanor. I'm a member of the Teo community of Interfaith Franciscans, and I'd like to welcome you today on about my talk on Chiara Alfreduccio. And you might say, who is that? That is St. Clare of Assisi. That is her actual God-given name. So we're going to have a series of talks every Tuesday at this time, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard, 8 p.m. GMT, about St. Clare of Assisi's spirituality. And today I'm going to give you a little introduction into St. Clare. We all know about St. Francis of Assisi. We all know about him and know about him fairly well, even though there's a lot more that we can learn about him. And we know a little bit about St. Clare, but we don't know a lot about St. Clare because she's really kind of taken a back seat to Francis. And obviously it makes sense because she is kind of the co-foundress of the Franciscan order. We all know that Francis founded two main orders, and he also founded, helped with her order, but he founded the Franciscan, the Friars Minor, and he founded the third order, which was the order, the secular order, or I think it's called the Brothers and Sisters of Penance, if I'm not mistaken. And then her order years ago was the Poor Ladies, eventually became known as the Poor Clares, which was a strictly contemplative female order. So let's delve a little bit into Clare. But I also want to say, I'm jumping around a little bit, but I also want to say that every week we'll touch on a different aspect of her spirituality. And we'll incorporate some music into our time, some of her own poetry, maybe some other poetry regarding Clare and what she believed in, and also some aspects of her spirituality. Just to let you know right off the bat that Clare had several different really big hallmarks about her spirituality. First of all, she believed in mortification. And what that means is subjugating the bodily senses in order to elevate the spirit. So she might deprive herself of food, of fasting. She might fast and do various things like that in order to discipline herself so that her spirit would be stronger. And that was really the thinking of the day. The other thing that she was, of course, she was about quite a bit is penance. You know, wanting to make sacrifices to actually appease God for all the people in the world that sinned and did everything that was bad in order. So she was trying to make up a lot for all the rest of us who weren't so good as she was. The other thing that she was into was love of the Eucharist. Remember, she was Catholic, and she saw the body and blood of Christ in the Eucharist as truly the body and blood of Christ, soul and divinity, the complete Christ in the Eucharist. And she saw the love of God that poured out from the Eucharist. She saw it as an extension of love to all people, and she saw all people unified in the Eucharist. The other thing that she was very much into, and really the hallmark of her whole life, was that of poverty. And when we think of poverty, we don't think of anything pleasant. You know, we think of poverty as the lack of almost everything, the lack of food, the lack of money, the lack of all the bare necessities of life. But we're talking here, yes, true poverty, but we're also talking spiritual poverty more than anything else. We're talking about the disattachment from earthly things in order to find freedom. And that's really what she was about. She was not attaching herself to things of this earth in order to find freedom of spirit. Remember Clare, I have to say now, get into her life a little bit. She was born in 1193. She was born in the 12th century. And as I said, her name was Chiara Alfreduccio. Her father's was Favarone Alfreduccio, and her mother's name was Ortolana. She was born into a very rich family. Her father was a nobleman, He was extremely rich. He had a lot of power, and her mother was born also of a noble family. So when Claire was born, she was expected to marry in the same way. She was expected to marry into another noble family, to be set up to be rich for the rest of her life, to have everything that she wanted and needed. And also her family would benefit from her marriage. There would be money that would be given to the family for her being married into a noble family, and also their connections would extend. So Claire was actually going to be set up to do this, and as was every other girl of her age at that time in Italy and elsewhere. Her mother, as her father was as powerful, her mother was also powerful in her own right, but she also tempered that power by the love of God and also by charitable works. So she was very fervent in her love of God and also in the charity that she extended to other people. So we see that a little bit of that genetics rubbed off on Claire even from her birth, because it was said when she was born and into her youth, she was someone who was full of virtue and love of God even from a little girl on. And she wanted, even from a little girl on, to fast and to pray and to do all these things. So even from that time, she was an unusual and favored child. Her mother named her Claire, which means transparency, transparent life or light. So she named her that. And it was said she was a beautiful little child. She had golden blonde hair. Now, when Claire was growing up, and as I said, she was full of zeal and full of loving God and all of that. She was growing up. She actually became aware of the Friars Minor. St. Francis at the time, who was older than her, was preaching in Assisi. And he was preaching, in various areas in the squares and various areas of Assisi, and she heard one of his sermons. And his sermon was talking about being freed from riches and material goods, as he often did preach, because he believed that not being attached to things also would give you freedom of spirit. And also he wanted to emulate Jesus Christ, who had nothing attached to him. He really had, he had his mother's home, his mother that he could always go to, but he had no real home for himself, and he had nothing but probably the sandals on his feet and the clothes on his back. So he wanted to emulate that. Francis wanted to be as close to Christ as he possibly could, and he saw this spiritual poverty, not being attached to things, as a way to do that. Now, him and his brothers, the Friars Minor, had no place. They had no monastery. They did have, I think it was that church, the Porziuncola, that he actually redid and rebuilt. It was down to ruins, and he rebuilt that, and they would stay there a little bit. But outside of that, they really had no home. And they had to beg for their food, and they really wandered the streets. They were almost like street people, like very zealous street people, preaching God's love, full of joy. You could just see it, dancing around, talking to the animals, preaching to the birds. I mean, a lot of people were wary of that in Italy at this time. And so they didn't want to have anything to do with them, and they told their children not to have anything to do with them. But Claire was fascinated by them. Even at a young age, and we're talking before 18, she wanted to try and help them. She would give them food, and, she would like to listen to them. So she was very much enamored with Francis from the very beginning that she heard him, and with the Friars Minor. The other thing that you have to look at that really propelled Claire into thinking that she wanted to be free of all treasure and of all riches was that, as I said, she was born into a rich family. And her father, who was very powerful, might often have financed a lot of the wars and a lot of the skirmishes that happened between city-states in Italy at the time. There was always warring going on. There was always one particular state in Italy trying to take over another, say Perugia trying to take over Abruzzi or whatever. There was always wages of war back and forth. And so Claire saw how all this greed and all this want of riches and all this envy and jealousy actually turned into war and skirmishes that she saw would never end. So she didn't want any part of it. She saw that all of the riches and all actually kind of promoted this violence. So she wanted nothing to do at all with any of that. So basically, what happened out of all of this is that Claire had made the decision that she was going to follow Christ and above all, offer her life to the vision that was revealed to Francis. Her family, of course, would be very opposed to this because, as I said, they wanted her to marry into a wonderful, rich family, that they would have better contacts then after that. They would have more money themselves and everything would be good. But finally, Claire was very resolute. She was 18 years old. And she said to herself she didn't want any parts of what she had grown up with. She wanted to follow Francis and the Friars Minor. So she ran away from her home on March 18th, 1212. And that was Palm Sunday. And that marked the start of her great adventure. She overcame all kinds of obstacles. She went in the middle of the night to the chapel of the Porziuncolo, where she was received by Francis and the Friars Minor, and they were all waiting for her there. And she consecrated herself to the Lord through the hands of Francis of Assisi. Because of security reasons, she was transferred to a nearby Benedictine convent, where she was actually left there for a period of time. And then she was transferred after that to another Benedictine convent because, of course, her father and her brothers and her uncles, I believe, were trying to look for her and to find her, to drag her back to the home. So at any rate, they found her eventually, and she already had her beautiful hair cut. She took off her veil and she showed them that her hair was cut. And they, from then on, knew that she was resolute in her decision and probably more or less left her alone. So that was the beginning of St. Clare. She was clothed with a very plain veil. Really, her habit was made out of sackcloth, and what she had to gird herself to hold in the sackcloth was a piece of rope. So that's really what her habit was about at that time. And after she started making her conversion and her vocation, what basically happened to her was that she was placed as the head of the community that she eventually founded. What happened is her sister Agnes came to join her. Her cousin Pacifica came to join her. And she started having a group of these ladies who were really nobility come to join her in her search for perfection. She was named Mother of the Order, and she wanted to be a living example of the vision that was transmitted through Francis to her. She always asked that her daughters, asked her daughters that everything the Lord had revealed for the order should be lived to its fullness. She's always was attentive to the needs of each one of her daughters and revealed the tenderness and attention of a mother. A lot of things that she did, she tended, that was another hallmark of Clare, she tended to all of the nuns that were put under her care, each one of them with a great tenderness. It's even said that, everyone had a blanket. Okay, but if she saw that a particular sister was pretty much cold or was a little bit more sickly or a little bit more tender in nature, she would take her own blanket and put that over the blanket that this one sister had so that she would be more comfortable and warmer. She even saw that if one particular habit of a sister was a little bit worn and a little bit tattered, if hers was better, she would say, I'll give you mine and you can give me yours. She always made sure that the sisters ate first and she would eat last. She was very attentive to all of them in trying to make them comfortable as possible, and she was always putting herself last. She would do the most difficult chores in the monastery, and she would never ask another sister to do a chore that she had not already done herself. It wasn't that do as I tell you. She did exactly the same type of a chore that she would give to another sister. So she was well aware of what she was asking others to do, and she was very sensitive to everyone. She would always go around at night and check on all the sisters and make sure they're okay before she would go to sleep herself. And she was very enthusiastic about exercising every class of sacrifice and penance. As I said to you before, that was a big hallmark of her life, sacrifice and penance. Her joy of suffering for Christ was something very evident, and was the greatest example that she gave her daughters. And it has to be said that in some of the things that I'm reading here, we can say that all the things that Francis and Clare did are very, how should I say, over the top or extreme. But it seems like, and this has been said many times, that when the Catholic Church or even society in general is going off in a direction that is a very negative direction, there comes people in the world that are extreme, that have to show you what the opposite of what's happening is like in order to kind of balance things out. So Francis and Clare were extreme, but they brought attention to themselves in that way. And in that, they brought attention to the message that they were trying to impart to others, that everything in life is not about riches. Everything in life is not about how much you can accumulate, that there's more to life than that. And there's a freedom into not being attached to everything. And there's hope in that, and there's faith in that, there's freedom of spirit in that, and there's the love of God in that. So, let me just see here. Humility was a great hallmark in St. Clare. She was always serving others with her teachings, her care, her protection, and her correction. The responsibility the Lord had placed in her hands, she did not impose on anyone, simply to boss people around. As I said, whenever she asked somebody to do something, it was something that she had already done herself. She would even seek to wash the feet of those who would arrive from begging for food outside. She would wash the sick. There was not one job that she would reject in the monastery, and she did everything with supreme love and humility. As I said, for St. Clare, poverty was the path where she could attain more perfectly that union with Christ. She felt that the love for poverty was born from the vision of Christ, who was poor, Christ the Redeemer and King of the world, who was born in a manger. He who is king nonetheless did not have anything, nor did he demand anything earthly for himself. So the life of St. Clare was a constant battle to remove herself from everything that kept her apart from love. And she equated love with Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ to her was love. So anything that kept her apart from love, she had to get rid of it. And anything that would limit her heart from the desire for the salvation of souls and having the Lord as her sole greatest love. And right now I want to put in a poem that was written by her that I think is good to put in at this point. This is a poem written by Clare of Assisi, and it's called Draw Me After You. And it kind of is an alignment, if you've ever heard of the Song of Songs in the Bible, it kind of reminds you of that. And this is from her. Draw me after you. We will run in the fragrance of your perfumes, O heavenly spouse. I will run and not tire until you bring me into the wine cellar, until your left hand is under my head, and your right hand will embrace me happily, and you will kiss me with the happiest kiss of your mouth. That's a very intimate poem written by the saint to Jesus Christ, who she saw as the love of her life, her spiritual love. So I just want to continue then. It's a very interesting poem that she's written, and it's a beautiful poem. And we can delve into that further, but right now we're just going to go on and tell you a little bit more about Clare. As I said, one of the things that she was interested in is the mortification of the body. Under her tunic, she would wear a piece of either pig or horse leather that was real itchy. A lot of saints did that at the time to even give themselves more trials and tribulations, like they didn't have enough already, but they wanted to do more. And that was the thinking of the time. Right now, the thinking of the time is for us to joyfully endure whatever comes into our lives that are not things that are so happy. But at that time, not only did they try to do that, but they tried to give themselves more sufferings. Now, I have to say I don't necessarily agree with that, but this is the thinking of the time, and this made her a saint. So who am I to disagree, really? Her bed was made of vine shoots that were covered with hay. So she even had a bed that was uncomfortable, was not real comfortable. But then she was forced to change that when she became sick. St. Francis said, enough is enough. You're doing too much, and you have to have something more comfortable. So he forced her into having something that was more comfortable for herself. She also led such an austere life and ate so little that it was even surprising to her sisters that she could even survive. There were days where she would go with nothing at all to eat. And she would just, and when she did eat, she would just have bread and water. She was very demanding of herself. And also, as I said, there was times when the sisters didn't even have hardly anything to eat at all. So she would fast, yes, out of mortification, but she'd also fast out of necessity so that they would have enough to eat. But she did so much that, again, Francis asked the bishop to intervene and order her to at least have a daily piece of bread that was no smaller than 1.5 ounces. So she was forced to eat something under obedience to the bishop. Another great love of hers was prayer. And prayer was the fountain and spring of all graces for her and for the entire world. Prayer was the purpose of her religious life and her profession. She spent many hours of the night in prayer to open her heart to the Lord and gather in silence the words of the Lord, words of love from the Lord. Many times during her prayer time, you could find her covered with tears, because she would experience the great joy of adoration and presence of the Lord in the Eucharist. She would kneel before the Lord and meditate on the Passion, and she would have streams of tears coming out of her eyes. So at times even the sisters would see her coming out of the chapel, and her face would be almost aglow with this happiness and this surreal glow from her time being spent in prayer. There are also some miracles that are attributed to her. As I said, there was always wars in Italy, and there was people invading Italy, etc. At one point in 1241, the Saracens attacked the city of Assisi. And the nuns were scared, obviously. They were scared to death. And of course they ran to her because she was the head of the monastery. And the Saracens actually came to attack the convent. They were at the exterior of the walls of Assisi. Remember, a lot of the cities of Italy and a lot of the feudal cities were surrounded by walls. So there they were. So the nuns went to pray, and St. Clare, who was extraordinarily devoted to the Blessed Sacrament, as I said, took in her hands the monstrance, or this container that contained the Eucharist, and came out to greet the Saracens, holding the monstrance in front of her. And she confronted them. At that moment, they experienced such a terrible wave of fear that they just fled away petrified. You know, you can imagine this little woman. I mean, she was not big. And I've actually seen her in Assisi. She was, I'd say, maybe about 5'5" or so. And she came out probably shouting or something and holding the Eucharist in front of her. And they probably thought, oh my goodness, like, what are you going to do? Are you going to attack this woman? Are you going to attack these nuns? Look at this faith that she had. So they just ran off and left them alone. Another occasion, the enemies were trying to attack Assisi and to destroy it, and St. Clare and her sisters prayed before the Blessed Sacrament, and the attackers withdrew without even knowing why they left. The other thing that happened with her is also multiplication of bread, like it happened with Jesus Christ on the hill when he was preaching. When he multiplied the bread and the fish, they only had a loaf of bread, and there was 50 sisters at the time in St. Clare. So what she did is she took the bread and halved it and gave half of the bread to the friars minor and kept half for her sisters and herself. And everybody ate to their full. So all 50 of them ate and were just totally full, and everything was fine. And another time, the Pope visited the convent, and St. Clare had invited the Holy Father to eat. The Pope did not accept. As a result, she asked him to bless the breads that were there. At the time, they had more than one, and so that they would have that as a remembrance. But the Pope responded to Clare, "It is you that I want to bless the bread, not myself." Of course, she protested, and then he made her, under a vow of obedience, to go and bless the bread. And immediately, when she blessed the bread, there was crosses that came over, engraved in each of the breads. And so that's another time. So another thing I have to talk about near the end of her life is she was sick for 27 years in the convent of San Damiano. That's where her monastery eventually was, San Damiano. And they said that she withstood all the sufferings of her sickness with heroic patience. From her bed, she would do embroidery, sewing, and she prayed. And the Holy Father visited her twice. And his comment was, "I wish I had so little need to be forgiven as this little nun has." Francis had died already before she died. And 3 of the saints' favorite disciples, Friar Junipero, Friar Angel, and Friar Leon, read to St. Clare the Passion of Christ when she was in her death agony. The saint repeated, "Ever since I dedicated myself to think about and meditate on the passion and death of our Lord Jesus Christ, all the pains and sufferings that I have no longer discouraged me, but rather consoled me." She was very much attached to the Passion of Christ. And on August 10th of 1253, at the age of 60, her 41st year of being a religious, 2 days after her rule was approved by the Pope, and she fought long and hard to have poverty as the hallmark of her rule, she went to heaven to receive her reward. In her hands was the blessed rule for which she gave her life. And I do believe that the area in Italy where she's still laid out in the convent there, she's in a glass sarcophagus, and I believe she still has that rule in her hand because she fought so long and hard for that, to have what she termed Lady Poverty, Blessed Poverty, to be the hallmark of her order, for her order not to be attached to anything. So there's so many things. There's letters, there's sayings of St. Clare. One of them is, "Do not be afraid, woman, since you will joyfully shine a light that will illumine with greater clarity the entire world." And that was one of the quotes that was attributed to her by her mother, Ortolana, that she would illumine the whole world. So there's a lot of hallmarks of Clare that we can look into, which we will look into. And we will look into her poverty, her simplicity, her love of God, her devotion to the Holy Eucharist, and her courage. We'll look into all of that in the coming weeks. But now I actually want you to take a moment and just think to yourself what you want to ask Clare. I want to set the stage for you. It's going to be a little meditation, but I want you to actually think about this. You're walking down a path, and you're walking past a wall, a high wall. It's higher than you. It's clay in color, and there's a little opening, a wooden gate. Above this wall, there's various flowers that are blooming, and they're spilling over the wall. They're beautiful. The gate is partially opened. You walk into this wooden gate, and there in the back of the garden, there's a beautiful garden, herbs, bees humming. It's summer, it's warm. There's birds that you can hear, there's splashes of water. And in the back of this garden, there's a little portico of shade and a table and 2 chairs. A rough-hewn table and a rough-hewn chair sitting there waiting for you. And there's a little nun sitting in the chair. She's dressed in sackcloth. She has a black veil on her head, and she has a beautiful smile on her lips. She stands up as you enter, and she beckons you to sit down. Before you, she has a little refreshment. She has a little bit of bread, some cheese, a little dish of olive oil with fragrant herbs, and yes, a glass of wine ready for you. For herself, she has the same, but she has a glass of water, of cool, cold water, in an earthen cup. She beckons you to sit down across from her, and she looks at you with a surreal smile. And you look into her eyes, which are blue and like pools of water. She looks at you intently, and she takes your hand in both of her hands and asks you, "What is it that you want me to tell you? What is it that you want me to tell you about myself that will help you on your journey? What do you want to know of me? What example can I give you that will help you to understand what it is that I'm all about, and in turn help you to understand what it is that you're all about?" She doesn't ask for an answer. She just asks you to linger there with her for a while. And she sees each of us one at a time and asks us the same question. She asks us to ponder what it is that made her who she was. And she asks if there's anything about her that can influence your life and help you to see more clearly who you are. Remember, Clare is always about showing her sisters how to live, being an example, helping them, being a mother to them. And she wants to be a mother through this, through these talks to all of us. So just stay there with her for a while and realize that she wants to help you in your journey and in your search, just as she helped her sisters in their individual journeys and in their individual searches. So go back and think about this in the next week or so. And think about this during the whole time that we are presenting these talks. What is it about Clare that inspires you or you want to have inspire you? What is it about her that you can take into your life and make it your own? What is it about her that is intriguing? What do you want to know that you don't know? How do you want her to teach you and lead you? How do you want her to be a mother to you? So we praise God for the blessings that she's given us, for being able to be with her and to see her, for being able to be inspired by her. And in the future, we'll have a lot more. We'll delve into things much more than we are now. But this is just a little for today. So you leave refreshed from your presence with her. You leave refreshed from the little meal she's provided for you. For it's much more than the meal. It was actually an impartation of her goodness and of her motherly love that has fed you and has filled you up. And for the final thing that I have for you is a blessing. And it's a blessing that she gave to Agnes of Prague, who was one of her sisters. And it goes, "What you hold may you always hold. What you do may you always do and never abandon, but with swift pace, light step, and unswerving feet, so that even your steps stir up no dust. Go forward securely, joyfully, and swiftly on the path of prudent happiness, believing nothing, agreeing with nothing which would dissuade you from this resolution, or which would place a stumbling block for you on the way, so that you might offer your vows and your truths to the Most High in the pursuit of that perfection to which the Spirit of the Lord has called you and has called each and every one of us." So that's pretty much it. I do have one last thing music that I want to play, and it is like kind of on an upbeat note, and maybe it's too upbeat. I don't know. But it actually sums up the way Claire was and how she felt about her Lord. So let's leave with this. This is how it goes.
Follow him wherever he may go, and near him I always will be, for nothing can keep me away. He is my
This is from Sister Act, and it's from Andre Rieu in Europe, I think in Austria. His orchestra.
I will follow him, since he touched my heart. Then listen and motion to thee. Oh, mountain so high and deep, lead me away.
That's all I can say. Is that sums up how Claire felt about our Lord. So thank you so much for being here today and for being with me today. Hope we can be together again next Tuesday. Namaste.